All right, everybody, today we're coming at you with massive breaking news. Now, I am a little late to the party, so I'm sure you've already heard about this, but we have two massive changes to next weekend's main and co-main events for UFC 294 in Abu Dhabi. Originally, the main event was going to be the lightweight title rematch between Islam Makhachev defending his championship against Charles Do Bronx Oliveira. However, Oliveira recently suffered a cut due to, I believe it was probably in sparring. He suffered a cut over his eye and was forced to withdraw on around 8-9 days notice. Now, going into this weekend, we're going to have Alexander the Great Volkanovski step in to rematch Islam Makhachev from their first fight back at UFC 284. Stepping in on about a week's notice is unheard of, but I wouldn't expect anything less from Alexander the Great. Now, I know some people are going to be upset because Mateusz Gamrot was originally set to be the backup fighter if anything was to happen. And I know Mateusz Gamrot's probably super pissed off right now because he didn't get the call. But Volkanovski versus Makhachev 2 is a solid replacement. It's a very highly anticipated rematch, and the fans are getting it and really don't have to wait at all because it was such short notice due to the fact that Oliveira had to withdraw. Looking at that fight, we will break that down in a minute, and then you also had Kamaru Usman stepping in on short notice again to fill in for Paulo Costa against Islam Makhachev, against Khamzat Chimaev. Chimaev versus Usman, another fight that fans have been wanting for a very long time, and they get it on just over a week's notice. Usman versus Chimaev, however, it is not going to be at welterweight. Usman is moving up, probably due to the short notice nature. I don't think he's going up to middleweight permanently, but he's moving up to 185 pounds to take on Khamzat Chimaev. So let's get into it, and we'll start off with Chimaev versus Usman. I mean, man, what is there to say? Chimaev versus Usman, former welterweight champion, taking on one of the most feared contenders in welterweight and middleweight history in Khamzat Chimaev. This is a fight that everybody's wanted for a very long time, and when I look at it stylistically, obviously before I watch tape and break it down on the week of the fight, the one thing I will say is that I'm very intrigued to see how the wrestling between Chimaev and Usman is going to take place. Usman is not easy to take down, but he doesn't really go to his wrestling much anymore either. He kind of stays on the feet and tries to strike with his opponents. And I think it's probably going to turn into a striking match between Usman and Chimaev. I feel like it's going to be the uppercuts and crosses of Chimaev facing off against the jab and teep kicks or front kicks to the body of Kamaru Usman. He can jab from orthodox, he can jab from southpaw, and I do think he's going to have some issues with the jab of Usman. That's the one thing I expect him to implement in this fight, is the jabs and front kicks and low kicks against Chimaev. He's going to have to be careful about the kicks because you don't want Chimaev to catch your kick and then try to shoot it into a takedown or chain wrestle and get you down to the ground. But I really do think that this is an intriguing matchup, and I do think Usman is live to get it done here. You know, when Gilbert Burns fought against Chimaev, he dropped him, he rocked him. Chimaev dropped him with a southpaw jab, which is coincidentally the same shot that Usman dropped Gilbert Burns with when he switched to southpaw. So this fight actually has some very interesting, stylistics when going into it. The southpaw jab is what Chimaev used to drop Burns. Usman did the same thing to Gilbert Burns as well. I think the jab is going to be very sharp. It's going to be very crisp from Usman, but you have to be careful that he doesn't slip inside the jab. Does Chimaev throw the overhand right, slip inside and throw a lead uppercut? I could see him using that lead uppercut if he's able to slip and come up, or slip to the outside and follow up with that rear uppercut. I think the uppercuts and crosses of Chimaev, and then the jabs, like I said, teep kicks, calf kicks, and everything like that are really going to be the main weapons that each try to implement on the feet. I think the clinch game is going to be interesting because I think that Chimaev is probably at a strength disadvantage in the clinch against Usman, but I feel like a technical advantage probably goes to Chimaev because he's so fast with his takedown entries, with his chain wrestling, but sometimes he goes so heavy with the strength and just kind of tries to overpower you. It's still technical shots, but I would expect that if Usman gets taken down by Chimaev, it would more than likely be off of like ankle picks or low singles, chaining it into the head on the outside single, cutting the corner, then running the pipe, or using the crackdown series where he'll go to the ankle pick, hike the way up to the single leg, turn the corner, and then crack down as he turns the corner to get that takedown. You know, Usman has issues with his knees, so I think that the wrestling would be a little bit harder for him to defend. He's also coming in on short notice. He wasn't necessarily getting ready for a fight. At least a fight hadn't been announced for Usman yet, but I'm sure he's been training. I'm sure he's been getting ready. He looks like he's in good shape, but I do think that Chimaev is going to win this fight. I think it's going to be interesting. I do think that the jab of Kamaru is going to give Chimaev some trouble, but I think that overall, based on the short notice replacement, based on everything going into this, I think Chimaev is going to finish Kamaru Usman. Do I think he's live as an underdog in Kamaru? Yeah, absolutely, and it's very difficult to get Kamaru at an underdog price as well. So that is something you want to take into consideration if you're looking at the betting side. Betting Chimaev at like a 2.5 to 3 to 1 favorite probably isn't the greatest idea. At that point, I would probably bet Volkanovski over Islam, which is something we're going to talk about next. But I do think that Chimaev's going to get it done. I think he finishes Usman. I think he's going to catch him with a big shot on the feet, and I think he's going to knock him out. I could see him dropping Usman, jumping, taking his back, spinning, getting the body triangle in and getting a submission. But I would say that's probably less likely would be for him to submit Usman, because, you know, Usman has never been submitted, but he did get his back taken and put into a body triangle by Leon Edwards in the first round after he got that inside trip takedown. So we know that trip takedowns, probably low ankle picks, chain wrestling is going to work against Usman. Usman doesn't really use his wrestling offensively at this point in his career because he's kind of fallen in love with his striking. I do think the jab is going to be the best weapon for Usman that I've said multiple times, but I am going to side with Chimaev to get it done. I think based on the short notice factor, I think 185 isn't that big of a difference. You know, I really don't, because Chimaev had fought at 170 before as well, so I think I wouldn't put too much mind into the weight debacle of it being at 185. I think it still is going to play out like if they were both at 170 pounds, but I do think the strength of Chimaev is going to be tested because Usman's a very strong fighter, but I think the speed and the crispness of the combinations on the feet are going to give Usman some trouble, but I also think that Usman's wrestling defense is going to be harder for Chimaev to be able to, or it's going to make it harder for Chimaev to be able to execute the takedowns, but I am going to go with Chimaev to catch Usman with an uppercut on a level change and knock him out. I'm going to go with Khamzat Chimaev to knock out Kamaru Usman in round 2. Give me round 2 KO for Khamzat Chimaev over Usman. If it was a full camp, I think it would be a much closer fight. I still think it's going to play out very close, and I do think Usman's live to potentially win a decision or even catch Chimaev on the feet. He's got sneaky power, and like I said, the straight punches from Kamaru are going to be a big weapon for him against a fighter in Chimaev. But the pick is going to be Chimaev, second round KO with that uppercut right up the middle. All right, and then the rematch that everybody wanted, but nobody was expecting we were going to get so soon, between Alexander the Great Volkanovski, the featherweight champion of the world, taking on the lightweight champion at the current point in time in Islam Makhachev. We all know they both faced off at UFC 284, and it was a very close fight, a razor-thin fight, but a lot of people believed that Volkanovski did enough to win 3 out of the 5 rounds. There were a lot of people who backed Volkanovski. There were a lot of people who doubted Volkanovski and probably are going to be siding with him going into this fight, but wouldn't have thought twice about picking Islam in the last matchup. I think even with the short notice replacement aspect of the fight, I expect it to play out very similar to the way that the first fight played out, with Islam having some success with the takedowns, Volkanovski being able to get back up to his feet, stay patient, get put in certain positions, but be able to scramble his way out or be able to work his way back up to the feet. I expect Islam to have some success in the striking again, but I do think that even with Volkanovski coming in on short notice, I think that he's going to be a lot more adept and a lot more respectful of Islam's striking technique coming into this fight, and I do think that plays into the favor of Volkanovski. He probably didn't think that Islam could catch him with much of anything in the first fight and thought that it was going to be, his striking was going to outweigh Islam without a doubt, and Islam thought that his wrestling was going to be able to crack right through Volkanovski. Do I think it's going to be as impactful, as tense as the last fight? I do, honestly. I think that these fighters are very, very evenly matched. I do think that the speed and the feint game, setting up his strikes, the feints, the level changes, the stance changes, switching southpaw, right cross, straight left, going back orthodox, jab, jab, circle, jab, jab, right low kick, jab, cross, inside kick, jab, inside low kick, into the right cross. All the combinations of Volkanovski, I feel like he's going to be more adept to dealing with Islam in this fight. At the same time, I think Islam's going to have success on the feet as well, like he did in the last fight. He landed a good head kick on Volkanovski. His kicking game was pretty solid from the southpaw stance. He was able to catch Volkanovski with some shots and even drop him to a knee at one point. But when I look at this fight, even with the short notice replacement stylistics of it, I still favor Volkanovski just like I did in the last one. And I favor him a little bit more now because we know how closely matched these fighters are. And I think that the fighter who can make more adjustments in this rematch, even though he wasn't getting ready for it, and you have to think of it in that regard, the fighter who can make more adjustments and really impact their performance, I feel like is Volkanovski, and it's not going to be Islam. Islam fights pretty much the same in all of his fights, except his striking looked a lot better in the title-winning performance against Oliveira, dropping him with the right hook, landing some good head kicks. His kicking game was, I think, heavily underestimated by Oliveira, but he has a very good straight left hand, a good right hook. He's good at getting that outside foot, but against a fighter who uses so many stance changes, switches, level change feints into combinations, throwing combinations while switching stance, going into a fight now where he knows he can compete, which I'm sure he believed the first time as well, going into a fight where he knows he can be competitive, he knows that he can handle the wrestling of Islam and be able to, come out on the other side without getting submitted or without getting finished. I do think that plays into the confidence of Volkanovski, and I think if Volkanovski comes into this fight more confident, I see him, like I said, making more adjustments going into this rematch than Islam. I don't see too many differences stylistically or technically that Islam can make in this fight. He had decent success with the striking, like we've already touched on. He's gonna be looking for the wrestling, be looking for the takedowns, probably be looking for the single legs, the ankle picks, more than the inside or outside trips, because it's harder to get inside or outside clinch takedowns or body lock takedowns against shorter, stockier fighters. It's easier to get those type of takedowns against taller, longer, rangier fighters, and that's not what Volkanovski is, but he uses his range very well. I think Islam and Volk is going to be extremely competitive, but I am going to go with Volkanovski to actually TKO Islam Makhachev in the later rounds. I'm going to side with Volkanovski again because there's no reason why I shouldn't going into this rematch. I don't really see a reason to not side with Volkanovski, and I see a lot of reasons not to side with Islam. Now, I've picked against Islam with Charles Oliveira. I picked against Islam in the first fight with Volkanovski, so maybe you think that I'm just an Islam hater, but I was very close to cashing that ticket on Volkanovski by decision in the last fight, and although I don't think it was a robbery, I do think Volkanovski won it, and I think he's going to put a stamp on it in this rematch and claim that double champ status. I think it's going to be a late fourth round TKO where eventually he's just going to gain that confidence, build it up, stop the takedowns, and be able to execute more combinations and land his strikes more freely on the feet, now knowing what he's going up against. I do, like I said, think Islam's going to make some adjustments. I do think he might have more success with the wrestling. He will have some success with the striking, but I do think that he might come in a little bit overconfident with the striking technique, and that's going to lead him to get caught by the much more technical striker in Volkanovski, even whilst moving up in weight. So give me Alexander Volkanovski to become the new UFC lightweight champion on 10 days notice, or 8-9 days, whatever it is, via a fourth round TKO finish. I'm going with Volkanovski because there's no reason for me to pick Islam going into this rematch.